Hello to all. My name is Hugo Pereira. I am an assistant researcher at the University Nova of Lisbon, and I'd like to thank you for watching this recording. This is a very unusual form of presentation for me, but I'll do my best to make it work. Today I bring you a paper about the sociotechnical construction of a large technical system, in this case the Portuguese railway network built between 1850 and 1900. This was the period during which the main bulk of the main lines of the Portuguese network was built. And I suggest that to follow the main system builders behind the construction of this system. And I make a distinction between those system builders who had the expertise and those who had the political power to decide. In this group, I include the engineers, of course, who were crucial to build the railways, since considering that they had the expertise to survey the land and to build the railways. I also include the army officers, who wanted to prove that they were still worthy and in this new age of fast travel. And these groups constitute the experts. Then on the side of the political power, we have the government and the parliament, even though in this period of Portuguese history the parliament was completely controlled by the government. And we also have the investors who backed financially the construction of railways, and the local politicians, the politicians in local constituencies in the periphery, who tried to push the railways closer to serve their constituents. So these are the main actors in this story. They were. I will analyze them separately, even though it's maybe hard to actually separate them, because engineers could also be local politicians, they could also be MPs, and it could also even be ministers, and the same can be applied to army officers. In any case, for the sake of argument, I will I'll try to analyze these groups separately. They have some common opinions between them. All of them believe that railways meant progress, that would bring a revolution to the Portuguese transportation system, and that could turn Portugal into a relay platform between Europe and the rest of the world. Considering that Portugal was in the westernmost corner of Europe, it could act as the closest port to offer the closest ports to America or to Africa, in order to become an exchanging point between the two continents. And this belief was so strong that the main suggestions that all of them shared was the construction of cross-border links with Spain. And they believed it so much that by the 1880s, Portugal had already built 5 transnational railways, 4 across the eastern border with Spain, and 1 across the northern border with Spain. Most also believe that, considering that Portugal was not a rich country, and it had a limited access to credit, even though Portugal was a part of the gold standard since 1854. But considering that the financial capability of Portugal was limited, all believed that the railways should be built as inexpensively as possible. And of course, this led to some common decisions, like building in the flatlands first, like building railways that served previous trade routes, or led to the decision to adopt the technology of narrow gauge in the highlands of the country in order to cut costs. Now, moving to these separate groups, I will begin by speaking of the engineers. And engineers, of course, they were the technical experts. They had the expertise to survey the land, they had the expertise to build the railways, and to evaluate any offer that arrived to the government or to the parliament. They did their work either in the field, in the mountains, or in the flatlands, or in the offices of the Ministry of Public Works, or at their own association, the Association of Civil Engineers, which was created in 1869. One of the aspects in the railway policy that the engineers lobbied the most was for the approval of a railway plan. They wanted the government and the parliament to approve a railway plan that said which lines should be built and which lines should not be built, and which lines should be built first, and with which conditions, etc. However, this plan was never approved by the government. It was never taken, and it was never approved by the parliament. And some reasons can explain this. First of all, it was not easy for the engineers to get to a consensus. Different engineers proposed different networks, considering their own technical skills, what they believe to be the most efficient lines, and what will be the most profitable lines. And of course, also some tried to take the railways to their own constituencies, to the places where they held some political power. But of course, that with considering that the statistical and the cartographical data in Portugal was very deficient, it was very limited. It was impossible to tell which network was better than the other. The Association of Civil Engineers in the 1870s, they tried to reach a consensus, and the consensus they reached, and they sent a proposal approved by most of the engineers to the government. But the government decided to disregard this offer. And as a matter of fact, after the proposal of the Association of Engineers was approved, many others continued to come and to appear and to be designed by different engineers. Now, the government was not really interested in approving this network because it gave it more leeway to do whatever it pleased. If a network was approved by law, the government had to follow that network by rule. Whereas without a network, they could choose which investor they wanted to work with. They could choose which line they wanted to build. If they could appease some local influence, they could use it to give railways to their own supporters. And this is also one of the main reasons why this network was never approved. Now, with this, I do not mean to imply that the input of the engineers was completely disregarded. As a matter of fact, the network that was approved by the Association of Engineers turned out to be very similar to the network that was actually built. There were some important differences in some lines, but most of the lines the engineers suggested they eventually were built. So this goes to say that engineers also had an important say in the final results of the line, even though some factors took precedence over their technical input. Now, if engineers were concerned about the technical aspects of railways, the military personnel, they were more concerned about the defense of the kingdom. They were concerned about the cross-border links because they were afraid that this could promote or this could favor an invasion of Portugal by the Spanish. And let me remind you that the memory of the French invasions, during which the Spain and France allied to invade Portugal, was still very vivid in the memory of many army officers, mostly veteran army officers. And of course, they were also very afraid that these cross-border links could be given to Spanish companies. And this was one of the reasons they suggested many different options to the government to make the railways, the cross-border links, safer from the point of view of defense. But as it happened with the engineers, the suggestions of the military, they were very uneven, very heterogeneous, and the government could also choose whatever option he liked. And furthermore, even in the military, the political background tainted the discussion, because a military could offer a suggestion that went along what his party wanted to impose in the construction of the network. So there was this game between politics and military expertise, also in this field of the military discussion about the Portuguese railways. In any case, and unlike what happened with engineers, most of the suggestions of the military, they were disregarded. For starters, they were very expensive. It was very expensive to build a railway that was solid from the point of view of defense. Furthermore, it was believed that war was an unlikely scenario in the 19th century, so there was no need no cause for a great concern, and no cost to spend lots of money with the concerns of the military. And furthermore, it was also believed that even if there was a war, the strategy should be what it was in the past, to barricade Lisbon, the capital, and then to wait for an intervention from the British to help Portugal fight the foreign invasion. The government, on its now moving to the agents that had the political power, the first who I should talk about was, of course, the government. And the government tried to balance different inputs, the inputs from the engineers, the input from the military, and also the lobbying from local politicians, and also the private companies that wanted to invest in Portugal. Now, usually the government chose the cheapest route possible, regardless of the suggestion of the engineers. And this was a very important factor in the final outcome of the network. It was the lack of financial, or the limited financial capability of the Portuguese treasury to build the best network possible. Furthermore, the government usually accepted any proposal that was offered to them by private investors, and again, regardless of the opinions of the engineers, especially if those offers were free. If an entrepreneur came to the government saying that he wanted to build a railway, and he demanded no guarantee of yield, no tax exemptions, no whatever. And in this case, the government immediately accepted the proposal, even if its engineers said that the line was not usable, the line was not useful, the line was not profitable. Even in that case, the government accepted the offers proposed by private entrepreneurs. More rarely, the government could also lease railways to its political supporters. Now, this didn't happen very often, but there were some cases where the government decided to give a railway, the right to build a railway, to one of its supporters, regardless of the opinion of the engineers. The engineers could say that the line was very bad for the country, was very bad for the rest of the network, but the government could give the railway anyway. No, but this was very rare. More frequent was the government acquiescing to the demands of local caciques, of local politicians that had some power in some given constituencies. Now, this happened at a very small level. It didn't influence whole lines, but it did influence some parts of the lines. But it did influence some parts, some stretches of some tracks that took a curve, or that was extended to serve the constituency of a a given politician who was supporting the government. And of course, the private companies, they were also a very important factor that overrode the input of the engineers and of the military. They were very, very important in setting the cross-border links with Spain. Because even though Portugal wanted to build railways towards Spain, Spain was not really interested in this business, and the Spanish engineers said it was better just to build railways around Portugal, across the parallel to the border, in order to serve better their own ports. And in this case, private companies were very, very important because they operated in both sides of the border. There were some cases where the main investors, the main entrepreneurs, they were Spanish, and so they got the line in Portugal and its extension in Spain. Other cases involved railway companies that had concessions in Spain, and they wanted to extend it to Portugal. And in this case, they also could. They were very helpful to build those railways against the will of the engineers in Spain, but for the will of the Portuguese engineers and all the agents involved in this in policy making in the railway sector. However, most of the times there were some disputes with private companies because they also wanted to make the cheapest route, even if these decisions could go against the input and the feedback of the engineers. And in most cases, this turned out to in favor of the companies. Moreover, usually the companies had a clause in its contract that forbade the government to build parallel lines in a given radius, usually 30 kilometers around the tracks. And in some cases, this prevented the government from building other lines because the companies had this clause, and this also influenced the design of the network for a non-technical reason. And more importantly, they usually had very strong connections with the stock exchanges in Paris and London, which were the stock exchanges where Portugal found most of its external financing. And in some occasions, these companies they could lobby in those stock exchanges to stop the flow of finance to Portugal if their demands were not met. And this happened at least twice in the 1860s with two companies, one French and one British, that did just this. They lobbied in the stock exchange of Paris and London, and until Portugal gave in to their demands, it got no financing from these stock exchanges and these financial plazas. So to conclude, well, one can say that the government was of course the common point between all these agents, because the final decision was up to them. The government had a final say on which lines should be built and which lines should not be built, and it had to balance this the technical input of the engineers, who were arguably the most important arguments, the most important feedback in this field. But it also had to balance it with its army officers, which, as I said, they weren't very important. But more important was the private companies that could be very powerful to influence the design of the network. And of course, they also had to balance with the demands of the local caciques, who could blackmail the government, saying either you give me this railway, or either you build this railway through my constituency, or I turn my cloak and I go to the opposition and to the other party. So there were many non-technical reasons that explain the final outcome of the Portuguese railway network and the final design of the grid. But I wanted to end this paper with another reflection about why the input of the engineers was not as evident in the final design of the network. For starters, their opinions were very heterogeneous. It was easy for any government to find an engineer who went along with what he wanted to do in policy making in the railway sector. But most importantly, it was also a matter of sharing power. It was important for the government not to share enough power with the engineers, otherwise those politicians that did not have the technical expertise could be set aside. So this was also a matter of staking a claim and saying that the political power could not be completely delivered to engineers, and this is also one of the reasons, one of the non-technical reasons that end up explaining the final result of the grid. And so with this I conclude my presentation, and well, I hope you have enjoyed it, and I hope you have some questions for me in the end. Thank you.